I don't remember when it started. That's the most unsettling part. There was no single moment when I woke up and realized I had become someone else. No dramatic change, no clear before and after. It happened quietly, slowly, in a way that made it almost impossible to notice while it was happening. I just adapted. At first, the changes felt harmless. Necessary, even. I adjusted my reactions to fit the situation. I chose my words more carefully. I learned which parts of myself made things easier and which parts caused friction. Over time, I kept the useful parts and hid the rest. That felt like growth. I told myself this was what maturity looked like. You don't say everything you think. You don't act on every impulse. You learn to compromise. You learn when to stay silent. You learn how to be convenient. So I learned. My life didn't fall apart. It stabilized. From the outside, everything looked coherent. Predictable. I was functioning well. I met expectations. I didn't create unnecessary problems. I became someone people could rely on. They said I was grounded. They said I was easy to be around. They said I had changed in a good way. I believed them. What I didn't notice was how much of myself was missing from that version. Not in a painful way. In a quiet way. Like furniture slowly removed from a room until it still looks livable but feels strangely empty. I stopped reacting strongly to things. Not because I didn't care, but because reacting complicated my life. I stopped arguing when something felt wrong. I stopped explaining myself when it took too much effort. I learned how to nod, agree, move on. Peace through disappearance. At first, that peace felt like relief. Relief is addictive. It teaches you that silence is safer than honesty, that fitting in is easier than standing out, that being agreeable protects you from conflict. So I leaned into it. Days passed smoothly. Weeks folded into each other. I stopped expecting anything from my life except continuity. I wasn't unhappy, that's what made it difficult to question. I was fine. Fine became my default state. Fine is dangerous. I remember catching my reflection one evening, completely by accident. Nothing dramatic was happening. I was just passing by a mirror, distracted, thinking about something else. For a moment, I didn't recognize the person looking back at me. Not physically. Emotionally. The face looked familiar, but distant. Like someone I used to know well but hadn't spoken to in years. Someone whose expressions I remembered but whose thoughts I no longer had access to. That moment stayed with me. I tried to shake it off. Everyone feels disconnected sometimes, I told myself. Life is tiring. People change. This is normal. But the feeling didn't leave. I began noticing how often I acted automatically. How rarely I checked in with myself before responding. My reactions felt rehearsed. Polite. Efficient. They solved situations without involving me emotionally. I was living as a solution, not as a person. At night, when the noise of the day faded, I felt it more clearly. A strange emptiness that wasn't sadness and wasn't anxiety. Just the awareness that something essential wasn't being used anymore. I would ask myself simple questions and struggle to answer them. What do I actually want? What matters to me now? The answers used to come easily. Now they felt distant, vague, outdated. Like questions written for a version of me that no longer existed. That scared me. Not enough to stop, but enough to notice. I realized how often I described my life without using the word I. Things were happening. Decisions were being made. Plans were unfolding. I was involved, but not centered. I wasn't steering. I was adjusting. The more I adjusted, the less friction I felt and the less myself I recognized. I had become very good at being what was needed. So good that I stopped knowing who I was when nothing was required. People around me seemed comfortable with this version. That made it harder to question. If no one else had a problem, maybe the problem was me. Maybe I was overthinking. Maybe this was just adulthood settling in. But deep down, something resisted that explanation. I hadn't become someone better. I had become someone easier. And one quiet evening, sitting alone with nothing demanding my attention, a thought surfaced that I couldn't dismiss. If this is who I am now, when did I agree to stop being myself? I didn't have an answer. And the longer I sat with that question, the more unsettling it became. Because it wasn't asking about my past. It was asking about my future. Once that question took hold, when did I agree to stop being myself? Everything I had learned to ignore became louder. Not dramatic. Persistent. Like a sound you can't unhear once you notice it. I started paying attention to how often I edited myself before speaking. How quickly I filtered thoughts to make them softer, safer, easier to accept. I didn't ask whether something was true for me anymore. I asked whether it would be convenient. Whether it would disrupt the balance I had built. I had trained myself to be manageable. That training didn't come from nowhere. It came from experience. From moments when being honest cost too much. From situations where expressing myself created tension I didn't know how to resolve. From learning, over time, that life flows more smoothly when you remove sharp edges. So I removed them. At first, it felt like wisdom. You don't fight every battle. You don't insist on every truth. You learn which parts of yourself are worth defending and which parts can be adjusted. But somewhere along the way, adjustment turned into replacement. I noticed how rarely I felt strongly about anything anymore. Opinions blurred. Preferences softened. Even joy arrived muted, like it didn't want to take up too much space. I wasn't sad. Sadness would have forced a reaction. I was neutral. Neutrality is comfortable, it's also empty. My body started carrying what my mind refused to acknowledge. Sleep stopped restoring me. I woke up already tired, as if existing required constant self-monitoring. I felt tension in my chest during ordinary moments, answering messages, making plans, agreeing to things I didn't care about. I told myself this was stress. Everyone feels like this sometimes. But stress usually has a source. What I felt came from suppression. I realized how rarely I made decisions based on desire. Most of my choices were reactive. I said yes to avoid explanation. I said no to avoid disappointment. I stayed silent to avoid conflict. Every choice made sense in isolation. Together, they erased me. I began replaying old memories with a strange kind of grief. Not nostalgia grief. I missed the version of myself who reacted instinctively, who felt things before justifying them, who didn't need permission to exist fully. That person felt reckless now. Inconvenient. Almost embarrassing. The moral dilemma formed slowly but became impossible to ignore. If I continued living this way, nothing catastrophic would happen. That was the promise of adaptation. I would remain stable, accepted, unproblematic. I would move through life without friction. If I stopped adapting, if I started being honest again, everything would become uncertain. I would risk rejection, conflict, disappointment. I would have to confront the possibility that people preferred the quieter version of me. That possibility terrified me. Some nights, I imagined disappearing. Not dying, disappearing. Stepping out of the life that required me to be smaller. Starting somewhere I wasn't already known for being agreeable and easy. The thought scared me. It also made my breathing slow down, like relief. That contradiction stayed with me. I couldn't unfeel it. I couldn't unsee how much effort it took to keep being this version of myself. Being convenient required constant vigilance. Being myself would require courage I wasn't sure I still had. I tried to argue my way back into comfort. I reminded myself how immature it is to insist on authenticity. How compromise is necessary. How people don't get to be fully themselves all the time. Those arguments had always worked before. Now they felt hollow. Then came a moment so small it almost passed unnoticed. Someone asked me a simple question, without pressure or judgment: are you okay being this version of yourself? I smiled automatically. Nodded. Gave the response that kept everything smooth. But inside, something broke open. I realized I didn't know who that version even was anymore. I knew how to perform it. I knew how to maintain it. But I didn't know if it reflected anything true. That realization scared me more than conflict ever could have. Because conflict assumes identity. Silence dissolves it. I understood then that I hadn't lost myself in one dramatic moment. I had negotiated myself away slowly, one reasonable compromise at a time. Each one felt harmless. Together, they formed a life where I no longer recognized the person living it. For the first time, staying convenient felt like an active decision instead of a default. And once you see that, neutrality disappears. Every time you choose ease over honesty, you choose distance from yourself. I didn't know yet what I would do. But I knew this: if I kept being someone everyone else could live with, I would eventually wake up unable to live with myself at all. And that felt like a loss I couldn't keep justifying. I didn't reclaim myself all at once. There was no dramatic return, no moment where everything suddenly felt authentic and whole again. What happened instead was slower and far more uncomfortable. I stopped editing myself automatically. That sounds small. It wasn't. Editing had become instinct. I filtered thoughts before they reached my mouth. I adjusted emotions before they reached my face. I anticipated reactions before I even knew what I felt. Removing that filter felt like standing exposed in a cold room. The first time I didn't soften my response, fear surged through me. My heart raced. My body reacted as if I had done something dangerous. I waited for consequences: rejection, conflict, withdrawal. Some of them came. Not everyone liked the shift. The version of me that fit easily into expectations had been simple to deal with. This version, slower to agree, more deliberate, occasionally resistant, created friction. I was no longer invisible, and invisibility had been my shield. That friction hurt. I questioned myself constantly. Was I being selfish? Was I overcorrecting? Had I confused authenticity with impulsiveness? Years of self-erasure don't disappear quietly. The voice that told me to stay convenient didn't vanish, it argued louder than ever. But something else happened alongside the fear. I felt present. Even when conversations were uncomfortable, even when I stumbled over my words, even when I regretted how something landed, I was there. My reactions weren't rehearsed. They were mine. That alone felt revolutionary. I realized how much energy I had spent maintaining an acceptable version of myself. Once I stopped, that energy had nowhere to go except back into me. I felt tired in a different way, not depleted, but sore, like a muscle being used after a long time of neglect. Some days, I missed the ease of being convenient. It had protected me from judgment. It had kept my life smooth. Being myself was rougher. Unpredictable. It didn't guarantee approval. But it gave me something I hadn't felt in years. Alignment. Not happiness, alignment. The sense that my inner reactions matched my outer life closely enough that I wasn't constantly splitting myself in two. Even doubt felt cleaner when it belonged to me instead of being pre-filtered for acceptance. I grieved what I had lost. That grief didn't disappear once I started being honest again. I mourned the years spent negotiating myself away, the instincts I ignored until they grew quiet, the relationships that only worked when I was smaller. Some losses were permanent. But I stopped confusing grief with failure. Failure would have been continuing to disappear quietly because it was easier than being seen. Failure would have been choosing comfort over truth until there was nothing left to protect. I learned something that still unsettles me: you don't lose yourself all at once. You lose yourself by being agreeable long enough that you forget who you were disagreeing with. You don't wake up one day erased. You wake up one day unfamiliar. Taking myself back didn't make my life easier. It made it honest. I no longer measure my days by how smoothly they pass, but by how present I am inside them. Some days are messy. Some conversations don't land well. Some choices create distance instead of harmony. But none of it feels hollow. If you're listening to this and recognizing yourself, the quiet edits, the softened reactions, the version of you that exists mostly to be manageable, ask yourself one question without defending the answer: who are you becoming by staying this way? Because there is a difference between being adaptable and being erased. Between compromise and disappearance. Between peace and silence. I became someone I didn't recognize by choosing ease over truth again and again. Becoming myself again didn't happen in a single moment. It happened the moment I decided that being real was worth being inconvenient. That decision didn't fix everything. It didn't restore the past. But it gave me something I had almost lost completely. A life where, when I catch my reflection unexpectedly, I don't look away.